On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we have Mr. Brian Chee and Mr. Curtis Franklin on the show today. Now, there's been a long time promise of the passwordless world. The question is Apple's next release be a forcing function for the industry to move to it? We'll definitely talk about Passkey. We have a great guest today. Yesterday was Star Trek Day, so in celebration, we're going to talk about Azure Space. That's right. Today we have Microsoft's Steve Kitay. He's Senior Director of Azure Space, and we're going to talk about just how they are extending the cloud to space. You definitely shouldn't miss it. TWiT on the set.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 510, recorded September 9th, 2022. Azure in Space. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by IRL, an original podcast from Mozilla. IRL is a show for people who build AI and people who develop tech policies. Hosted by Bridget Todd, this season of IRL looks at AI in real life. Search for IRL in your podcast player. And by IT Pro TV. Give your team an engaging IT development platform to level up their skills. Volume discounts start at 5 seats. Go to itpro.tv/enterprise. Make sure to mention Enterprise 30, your IT Pro TV account executive, to get 30% off or more on a business plan. And by userway.org. Userway is the world's #1 accessibility solution and is committed to enabling the fundamental human right of digital accessibility for everyone. When you're ready to make your site compliant, deciding which solution to use is an easy choice to make. Go to userway.org/twit for 30% off Userway's AI-powered accessibility solution. Welcome to TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world's connected. I'm your host, Louis Maresca, your guide through this big world of the enterprise. I can't guide you by myself. I need to bring in the professionals, the experts in their field, starting with their very own net architect at Skyfiber. He's network expert, security professional, plus he's all around tech geek. He is Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, how are you, my friend, this week? What are you into?
I am actually trying to troubleshoot why my underwater observatory went offline last week, and we're reasonably sure it's because we have a broken fiber. While that's being done, I thought I'd share with our viewers. A lot of you have made comments about, gee, I wish I could afford more fiber in my diet, so to speak. There is a concept for SFPs, so small form factor optics, gig optics, that will run gig over a single fiber. So instantly, if you have some fiber going between buildings and so forth, you can just slide them out, slide in a BD, spelled BIDI, SFP, and it'll transmit at one frequency and receive at another. So they are end specific. You have to order them in pairs, but they are not expensive, and you can instantly double the usable fibers between your buildings. Like I buy mine from fs.com, and it's like $15 for the transmit end and $10 for the receive end. So you can actually swap those out. They will work in just about any gig capable switch that has an SFP can in it. And you can save yourself some money.
That's amazing. I love bringing these things downstream, because now you have high-speed technology for a fraction of the cost. I love that, Cheebert. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for being here. Well, it's always refreshing to also have our senior analyst at Omdia, our security enterprise expert, Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, how are you, my friend? What's keeping you busy?
Oh, all kinds of things keeping me busy. I finally mostly recovered from COVID, which is a good thing. So now I'm working on a number of research projects for different customers. I'm also looking at little things like what some changes to legal enforcement might mean for enterprise security management. In other words, if we wanted to ask the question, what does it mean for enterprise security management if your CISO could go to jail every time you had a breach. So let's think about that, and it should give us fodder for some time to come.
Indeed. Well, speaking of enterprise security, we have lots to talk about this week. There's been a long time promise of the passwordless world. That's why we're making progress, but I think Apple's next release might just be the forcing function it needs to make it a reality across the industry. So we'll talk about what Passkey is, how it can help. Plus, we have a great guest today. Yesterday was Star Trek Day, so we have, in celebration, we want to talk about Azure Space and the goal of commercializing space. Today we have Microsoft's Steve Kitay, Senior Director of Azure Space, to talk about extending Azure to space. Lots of exciting stuff to talk about there, but before we do have to go and jump into this week's news blips. Now, it wouldn't be an enterprise week without a leak. That's right. This week, it's a cyber attack on Hotel Group. According to Bleeping Computer, one of the largest hospitality companies in the world, Intercontinental Hotels Group, was hit with a cyber attack that had a cascading impact on a number of their systems. So since the attack that started this week, they were not able to accept online bookings to their hotels. IHG operates over 6,000 hotels across more than 100 companies with brands that include Holiday Inn, Crowne Plaza, and Regent. Since this has happened in real time, there's really not much to disclose about the attack just yet, but in a statement from IHG, they're working vigorously to access the nature of the attack, the extent and the impact of the incident, and restore functionality to their systems. Now, based on the nature of the systems being down, it does lean towards a ransomware attack. Now, last month, Lockbit ransomware gang claimed an attack on Holiday in Istanbul. The attack also impacted the API layer as well. Now, cybercrime intelligence company Hudson Rock says that IHG has at least 15 compromised employees and more than 4,000 compromised users, according to the data linked to the IHG.com domain. Now, in the coming weeks, it will be interesting to see how that unravels. I guess it goes to show you, assume breach and protect the data you can to remain pirate.
Okay, let me get this out of the way at the very beginning. WordPress is, in my humble opinion, good software. It's reasonably secure. The WordPress ecosystem, on the other hand, has more holes than a second-hand sieve. An article at Dark Reading reinforces this with the news that attackers are actively exploiting a critical vulnerability in BackupBuddy, a WordPress plugin that an estimated 140,000 websites are using to back up their installations. This newly reported vulnerability, which was exploited as a zero-day, allows attackers to read and download arbitrary files from victims, including files containing configuration information and sensitive data like, passwords that can be used for additional compromise. WordFence, a company that specializes in WordPress security, observed attacks targeting the flaw beginning August 26 and reported that it has blocked close to 5 million attacks using this vulnerability since then. iThemes, BackupBuddy's developer, released a patch for the vulnerability on September 2nd. Now, if you remember a few seconds ago when I told you that WordFence started seeing attacks on August 26th, it's obvious that some number of companies might have been breached before the patch was released and could be installed. Now, the great problem with most WordPress installations is that they use plugins. Plugins can hugely increase the capabilities of WordPress, but there's no quality control on their programming. The BackupBuddy flaw is just one of thousands of flaws that have been disclosed in WordPress environments, almost all of them involving plugins in recent years. iThemes, BackupBuddy's developer, said it has identified a total of 1,628 disclosed WordPress vulnerabilities in 2021, more than 97% of them involving plugins. Nearly half of those were rated as being of high to critical severity. And troubling, nearly a quarter of the vulnerable plugins have given, so far, no known fix. Then there are the plugins that aren't just flawed, they're actively malicious. A large-scale study of over 400,000 websites conducted by researchers at Georgia Tech uncovered a staggering 47,337 malicious plugins installed on 24,931 websites, most of them still active. So what's a web developer to do? Keep the plugin numbers in check, make sure all plugins are up to date, and do your homework. Check out the history and reputation of each and every plugin you install.
This dark reading story, thank you so very much to them. Pen testing evolves for the DevSecOps world. So they're talking about penetration testing not only serves to triage and validate other defect discovery activities, it informs risk management activities such as threat modeling and secure design. A lot of words to talk about. Let's just make sure we test before we start rolling things out. So the article goes on, as threats become much more pervasive and dynamic, organizations are adopting proactive security measures such as penetration testing to build out a comprehensive security strategy. Good article, worth reading. Here's my spin on it. 1, penetration testing up until not too long ago, was an art form. You'd find the people that know how to do this kind of stuff over in Black Hat and DEF CON, and a pen tester, especially a skilled one, will be paid pretty well. Well, here's the trick. There's not enough of them. I think we can all agree to that. And modern DevSecOps teams are, in my mind, and from what I've been able to tell, are almost in continuous recruitment because there just aren't enough people with the right skills. So what needs to happen is we need to expand the people that do penetration testing so we can use their skills across a wider range of customers. And that's what this article really is about. Penetration testing as a service. They're abbreviating it as PTAAS. We all love as a service. So this just had to happen. We can't compete with the black hats on pay unless the white hats get paid by lots of people and survive through volume. The concept of pen testing as a service was bound to happen and will more than likely become a combination of AI and scripted testing combined with expert human fine-tuning on a larger volume scale. I had a chance to test drive this combination during an initial run-through when I did firewall shootouts for InfoWorld magazine back in 2009, and I got to use a system from Mu Dynamics. And literally what we did was we took the entire CERT library and ran it against the devices and scored them on how well they did on the different CERT vulnerabilities. I think combine that with AI, we might have something. And then fine tune it all with people that actually know what they're doing. And maybe, just maybe, we might be able to make some progress.
When we talk about the news that impacts the industry, sometimes we forget to talk about supply chain and manufacturing. Now, in news from Tom's Hardware that might not have hit your system just yet, Apple has reportedly approved 3D NAND flash produced by YMTC Corp in China for its next-gen iDevices. Now, why is this significant? Well, YMTC is producing a next-gen family of 6 plain 3D NAND chips featuring the company's X-Tracking 3.0 architecture and a 24 megatransfers per second interface, very fast. Being one of the world's largest consumers of 3D NAND flash, Apple tends to procure memory from different vendors, including Samsung and SK Hynix. Now, adding a YMTC to the supply chain means that Apple now have more choices from characteristics and performances points of view, as well as better positions to negotiate prices, as many products have supplied by the 4 manufacturers are actually identical, more or less. Now, YMTC's standpoint, from their standpoint, winning a supply chain contract with Apple is a big deal as far as the company, as it's primarily shipped its 3D NAND as well as solid state drives to China vendors only. Now, this might not be great news for Intel and Micron as well, who do manufacturing with some of their 3D NAND in the US. Now, what could this mean and what can this do? Well, it's possibly reduce the price of Apple's next-gen machines so you aren't paying almost twice the price of the same technology. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, we have the news bites. But before we get to the news bites, we do have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's IRL, an original podcast from Mozilla. Now, IRL is a show for people who build AI and people who develop tech policies. Hosted by Bridget Todd, this season of IRL looks at AI in real life. Who can AI help and who can it harm? The show features fascinating conversations with people who are working to build more trustworthy AI. For example, there's an episode about how our world is mapped with AI. That's right. The data that's missing from those maps tells us as much as a story as the maps themselves. And you'll hear all about the people who are working to fill in those gaps and take control of the data. Now, there's another episode about gig workers who depend on apps for their livelihood. Now, it looks at how they're pushing back against algorithms that control how much they get paid and seeking new ways to gain power over the data to create better working conditions. For political junkies, there are episodes about the role that AI plays when it comes to the spread of misinformation and hate speech around elections, a huge concern for democracies around the world. Now, I really like season 4, episode 1, checking out online shopping. There they talk about the hidden costs for shopping online and off and what you are actually giving up. Now, Meta Brown is a data scientist from Amazon and is on the show and talks about what happens when you're making an online purchase. It just may shock you what's going on there. Super compelling episode. Definitely check it out. Now, search for IRL in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. Many thanks to IRL for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's now time for the bites. And we've talked about the risk of still leaning on passwords to secure things in the enterprise world. Now, when you follow a lot of the identity experts out there, you'll find that a lot of them are emphasizing the passwordless world. That's right. Well, according to this Wired article, Apple is going to try and kill passwords, putting a large force behind the passwordless world. Now, we've been promised passwordless world for many years. The end of password logins hopefully will come near with the leap that Apple's going to bring in the next iOS launch. Now, when Apple launches iOS 16 on September 12th and Mac OS Ventura this month, or next month, actually, the software will include its password replacement known as Passkeys for iPhones, iPads, and Macs. Now, Passkeys allow you to log into apps and websites or create new accounts without having to create or memorize a stored password. This passkey actually is made up of a cryptographic key pair, replaces the traditional password, and is synced across all of your devices in the iCloud and the keychain. Now, its potential to eliminate passwords and improve your security online is very large, and placing these new insecure passwords and bad habits will definitely help. Now, if you access apple.com right now, you'll be interested. Right on your iDevice right now, try it out. You can actually log into the store by using this model. It's very interesting. Now, Apple's rollout of Passkeys is one of the largest implementations of password-free technology to date. It actually builds on years of work by the FIDO Alliance, an industry group made up of tech's biggest companies. In fact, Apple's Passkeys are in the version of the standards that were created by the FIDO Alliance, meaning that it will eventually work with Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon systems as well. Now, using a passkey is similar to using a password. In fact, on all of your iDevices, it's built into the traditional password boxes that websites use, so you can actually use it instead. Passkeys act as a unique digital key and can be created for each app or website that you use. Now, the word passkey is also being used by Google and Microsoft, with FIDO calling them multi-device FIDO credentials. Now, under the hood, Apple's passkeys are based on the Web Authentication API, or WebAuthn, which was developed by the FIDO Alliance and the World Wide Web Consortium. The passkeys themselves are public key cryptography to protect your accounts. As a result, a passkey isn't something that can easily be typed. Now, we've actually heard from Vittorio from Okta. He talked about this whole concept. So in a past episode, there's very interesting involvement here. And he talked about Apple demonstrating this. Now, Apple has demonstrated this technology and showed prompts appearing on your devices during the sign-in of account or creation phase. And this box will ask you whether you like a save a passkey or whether you're not. And at this stage, your device will then prompt you for some kind of biometrics, whether your Face ID or Touch ID, or another authentication method to create the passkey. Now, once created, the passkey will then be stored in your keychain and synced across all your devices. So the next time you try to log in, especially in Safari, it will ask you for the same one. Definitely interesting. They can also be shared to nearby Apple devices using AirDrop as well. Very interesting. I want to bring my co-host back in because we've talked about the passwordless world a lot. Now, Apple has a way of kind of force-feeding new standards out there. Curtis, I want to bring you in. Does this standard have legs? Are passkeys really better than passwords?
I think it does have legs. And one of the reasons is that it removes the responsibility for creating strong passwords from the user. That means that there are an entire variety of bad passwords that never get the opportunity to be used. And that's a good thing. Another thing is that they tend to use things like encrypted single-use tokens to pass these. And in the same way that the Google Wallet and Apple Pay is more secure than using a standard credit card transaction to purchase something, this is more secure because it reduces the chance that a man-in-the-middle attack, where someone is able to glom onto the data being transmitted in a transaction, can be used in subsequent transactions. I'm a big fan of the technology, and the big challenge for Apple is going to be reducing the user friction, the transaction friction, to the point that users believe that this is not only safer, but easier to use than their standard passwords.
I agree with that. I think it's very interesting because I usually don't, call out things or recommend things, but I was actually fairly surprised as well as glad that this actually happened. I didn't have to enter a password. I didn't even have to use a password tool to enter it for me. I just had to use my thumbprint or my face to actually log in. It was very easy. I hope it's as secure as they say it is. And Chee, I want to bring you in because isn't this just a multi-factor authentication in disguise under the hood?
You bet. You can definitely tell because they're saying flat out right in the article. And by the way, thank you very much to Wired Magazine. But I will say just about every major magazine I looked at is actually carrying a different form of this article. So it's creating a lot of stir. Yes, they are saying flat out that people that are using Android and Windows are not being left out because it complies with the FIDO standard. Now, this is, I'm not sure I want to say typical Apple, but this is a page from the Apple playbook. They will take what used to take 5 or 6 or 10 steps and giving it a nice slick wrapper. So it's happening under the hood. Yeah, it's doing one-time cryptographic keys and it's throwing them back and forth just like Apple Cash or Apple Pay. So that's where the foundation is. But they're using a lot of things from the FIDO world and exchanging keys and also auto-rolling some really hellaciously big passwords so that in theory, cracking a password or cracking a key from the system would be hopefully next to impossible. So I'm really looking forward to it. Now, I'm going to also say this is laying a foundation for yet another Apple device that emerged, call it a year ago, and then kind of disappeared for a while. It is a little dongle. It's not much bigger than a big stick of gum. And the idea behind it is being able to store passkeys and cryptocurrency on it and be able to have some sort of biometric authentication. So you can carry it around so that people that don't have an iDevice can still be able to carry around crypto and be able to use Apple Cash. And so they're trying to get a bigger market share. So it's going to be really interesting. And I am predicting that Apple Cache dongle is going to reappear probably in the next half a year or so. And I for one, am actually looking forward to it because I don't like cryptocurrency. There's a lot of problems with it, but if I had a truly secure device to be able to use cryptocurrency, maybe. But yeah, a long way of answering. Yes, it's actually MFA in disguise. It's not much different, but it's taking a lot of the pain out of traditional MFA.
Right. Now, the whole concept of FIDO is just fast identity online. It's becoming a kind of a global standard. Now, Curtis, the whole concept of Passkeys, obviously there's different implementations out there. We talked a little bit about the fact that Google has had this for a while on their for Google Identity. Now, Apple's bringing it more mainstream. Is this transferable? Is this something that we're going to see kind of leak into eventually the enterprise and get closer to kind of forcing organizations to use kind of multi-factor?
Oh, I think it is. And one of the reasons is that this is easier to use in many ways than some of our traditional multi-factor authentication systems. Remember a few moments ago, I said one of the keys is reducing the transactional friction for users, making this easy to use as well as secure. Well, the same is true for the enterprise. If this is something that is easier to implement than some of our current two-factor authentication systems, then I believe that the corporations will embrace it pretty quickly. And it seems like that could happen pretty readily as companies like Apple, and I suspect in not too distant future, companies like Samsung and the other mobile device manufacturers embrace it. It becomes something that is a selling point. It becomes something that they want to do. And as long as people are faithful to that FIDO spec, then it should be widely interoperable and a fairly low headache process for both corporations and individual users.
So, Chee, but I want to throw this back to you because I know you've seen some like very similar kind of technology implementation in the field before, right?
Yeah. So here's a good example. This is actually a keyboard. So I'm going to throw a business card into the slot. This was designed specifically with the U.S. military in mind for the CAC cards. So basically it's a smart card that doubles as a ID for the U.S. military that holds cryptographic information. Not a lot of traction outside the military because this was actually almost double the price of a standard keyboard because it needed the smart card reader in it.
Right.
However, Apple's dongle that I talked about is going to be Bluetooth. And considering the technology that Apple AirTags are using, I should be able to go and transfer the information to my Mac or my iPad or my iPhone very easily and very quickly. And because those dongles are Bluetooth, it should also be able to work with Android or Windows. So I think Apple is being Apple and removing a lot of user friction. Features like being able to transfer notes or URLs between devices in Apple ecosystem is drop dead easy. Well, I think Apple's going to do the same thing for passwords, passkeys, and eventually they're probably going to do the same thing for cache, crypto cache.
I think that's going to be the key. I think the user friction and even setting it up, getting it utilized, getting added to your website, getting added to your application is going to be the key to have this adoption be real. And then, of course, having it on devices like Android and like iOS as the forcing function for the industry to move to it. We'll have to definitely see how it adopts in the coming months. Thanks, guys. Well, folks, that does it for the Bytes. Next up, we have an exciting guest to join us. But before we get to our guest, we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's IT Pro TV. Now, your IT team needs the skills and knowledge to ensure your business is a success. And with IT Pro TV, more than 80% of users who start a video actually finish it. IT Pro TV is engaging and your team will enjoy learning on their platform. Now give your team the tools they need to make your business thrive. Courses are entertaining and binge-worthy. Keeping your team interested and invested in learning is a key. Now the tech industry is evolving, changing rapidly, and your team needs to be trained today. When a new software releases or a system upgrade or a cyber threat faces your business, IT Pro TV offers the training and perspectives of those disruptions within days, if not hours. Now, why is IT Pro TV right for your business? Well, get all training and certifications for your team done all in one place. IT Pro TV has every vendor skill you need for IT team training. They provide Microsoft IT training, Cisco training, Linux training, Apple, security, cloud, and so much more. More than 5,800 hours worth, ranging from technical skills to compliance to soft skills. You can do so much with IT Pro TV Business Plan. You can track your team's results. You can manage seats, assigned or unassigned team members, and access monthly usage reports. You can see metrics like logins, viewing time, tracks completed, and much more. Now, you can easily manage your teams as well. Manage those subsets of users or teams by providing them with a customized assignments, monitoring progress, and reporting on usage of the platform. Plus, assignments can be full courses or individual episodes within the course. Now, advanced reporting is also available to you. Get immediate insight into your team's viewing patterns and progress over any period of time with visual reports. Don't forget that IT Pro TV has individual plans as well. Give your team the IT development platform they need to level up their skills while enjoying the journey. For teams of 2 to 1,000, volume discounts start at 5 seats. Go to itpro.tv/enterprise. Make sure to mention Enterprise 30 to your IT Pro TV account executive to get 30% off or more on a business plan. And we thank IT Pro TV for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's now my favorite part of the show. We actually get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the TWiT riot. And today we have Microsoft's Steve Kitay. He's Senior Director of Azure Space. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Lou, thank you for having me. Great to be here with you.
So, as I mentioned, yesterday was Star Trek Day. So we thought in celebration, we bring Azure Space on and talk a little bit about just what's going on there. But before we get to that, you've had quite the interesting journey through tech and career. We have kind of a very diverse audience, various stages in their career. Can you take us on your journey and what brought you to Microsoft Space?
Yeah, thank you, Lou. I feel really fortunate. I have been on a journey, and it's really has been a unique career, and I consider myself really fortunate. My career actually started about 20 years ago, and I was working for the government. So most of my career was in government. I started active duty military in the Air Force as an engineer, and made my way into space as an Air Force officer. And from there, I was doing space programs, helping build satellites, launch satellites, and on the government side. And then an opportunity presented itself to go to Congress. And I worked as a staffer for the House Armed Services Committee, advising our nation's leadership on space and intelligence programs. And that was an extremely exciting run. It was from 2011 to 2017. And maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more throughout the discussion, but some of the initial thinking for the creation of a Space Force really started percolating then at that time. And from there, I went to the Pentagon and chatting with you all earlier, and Brian mentioning he was there at the Pentagon, I was as well, and I led space policy for the military, and really, really exciting time for the stand-up then of the Space Force and actually getting the legislation through to create it. And then that led to 2020, where I joined Microsoft, which has been an absolute dream job, working with a tremendous group of people dedicated to making an impact. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about that today.
Well, yeah, I think the first thing, the most appropriate thing to start with is just, why did Microsoft enter the space market? What's going on there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it really comes down to the change that's happening in the industry. There is this massive transformation that's happening in space. We're really at an inflection point in the capabilities that are being launched and built out in space. And Microsoft recognized this change that was happening and looked at its mission and purpose, which Microsoft's purpose is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And when we saw the changes that were happening in space, there was recognition that this is a perfect time and a perfect opportunity to stand up a group that's focused on this sector and bringing space technologies together with cloud computing and a partner ecosystem.
So one question, I'm sure you might get this a lot, but what about just launching your own rockets, your own satellites? Any intentions there in the future to do that?
So it's a great question, Lou, and you won't find any Microsoft rockets or satellites in space. And that was a deliberate decision. When we stood up Azure Space, strategically, we looked at what was happening and the opportunity out there, and we decided that Microsoft didn't need to build and launch its own satellites, but rather partner with others who do, and bring our unique strengths and our capabilities and bring them together with these different space companies. So it's a unique and differentiated approach where we're really building a partner ecosystem with Microsoft. And it's really exciting because we get to work with a lot of others in the industry and bring our strengths alongside them to do new and innovative projects.
Now, before we get to the kind of the extent of what Azure Space is, we saw a large market growth opportunity here. Obviously, we're seeing previous years, and I think it was 2019, we saw a $400 billion market. Just last year, it grew to 469. What do you think is fueling that growth? Is it military? Is it other installations, other systems?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lou. And it is tremendous growth that's happening, and there's a lot of changes overall that are happening in the industry, and predominantly those changes are happening in the commercial sector. And what was really once the domain, when you look back to 1957, when a first satellite was launched into space, in the early days, it was the provenance of superpowers and governments. And they were doing it for national security, they were doing it for exploration and national prestige. Now, what's happened over time is space capabilities have gotten more integrated into not only strategic uses, but tactical as well. But in the last 10 years, and particularly the last 3, we've hit this inflection point of commercial investment and commercial capabilities. Just to give you an example of numbers here of satellites that are now going into space, and particularly these satellites, in some cases, not all, because you look at the James Webb Space Telescope, very large, but in many cases, satellites are getting much smaller, to the size of, let's say, a loaf of bread, or maybe think of the size of a mini fridge. And in 2012, there were about 50 small satellites launched. In 2021, there were 1,700 small satellites launched in a single year. So commercial industry is really propelling this growth, and there is still tremendous government investment, and in fact, growing government investment with changes, for instance, the creation of the Space Force, NASA, and globally. There's actually over 90 countries that are now operating in space. So it's quite a massive change that's happening. And really, when we look forward to your question, I actually believe we're still at the earliest days of what's going to come.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing numbers of growth in 10 years of 300%, which is just crazy for a market. You mentioned this a little bit about the different installations, different types of sats. We've talked a lot in the past about how the fact that satellites used to cost $650 million. Now they're costing $6,500K. There's ones that called chip scale satellites down to $10,000 a rock for every rocket launch. And then it also means we're seeing the decrease of the cost of rocket launches too. So you're talking from $50,000 a kilogram down to $2,000 a kilogram. So, it's definitely seems like that if you have an installation or a system that you want to put up there, it seems like the cost is definitely going down. And if you want to build software and services around it, it sounds like it's the way to go. Now, I want to get a little bit into what Azure's doing here, because there's different services that they're playing. We talk a little bit about the edge, bringing your edge to space, but also there's other things like geospatial data and so on and so forth. So can you take us through what Azure's doing there?
Sure. And those systems that you were just talking about, satellites that are being launched into space, and these large numbers of satellites, all in the end comes down to very large amounts of data. And how you can think about what we're doing here at Azure Space is really twofold. The first is we are trying to democratize the benefits of space. And what we mean by that, and just thinking about the conversation that you had earlier on passwordless keys, and Curt had mentioned reducing the friction. That's essentially what we're doing, is we are reducing the friction to access these technologies. And that's what we mean when we say democratize the benefits of space for everyone. Now, as we're doing this, we're also trying to work with the satellite operators and the spacecraft industry to empower them with new technologies. So what we're doing is in three particular areas. The first is connectivity. The next is in data analytics. And the third is to enable developers both on and off the planet. And what I can do is I can get into each one of these, but from a broad frame, it's moving data, it's understanding data, and then it's empowering developers to create new applications around this data.
we're definitely going to get into some more of this because I think there's some interesting stuff. And again, we'll bring my co-host back in. But before we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is UserWay.org. Now, every website without exception needs to be accessible. And UserWay's incredible AI-powered solution tirelessly enforces the hundreds of WCAG guidelines that are out there. In a matter of seconds, UserWay AI can achieve more than what an entire team of developers can in months. In fact, at first, it may seem really overwhelming to make your website accessible, but UserWay's solutions make it simple, easy, and cost-effective. Now, you can even use their free scanning tool to see if your website is ADA compliant. Now, if you have an enterprise-level website with thousands of pages, UserWay offers a managed solution where their team can actually handle everything for you. Now, UserWay's AI and machine learning solutions powered accessibility for over 1 million websites out there, trusted by Coca-Cola, Disney, eBay, FedEx, and so many more of the leading brands. Now, UserWay is making its best-in-class enterprise-level accessibility tools available to small and medium-sized businesses as well. Now, you can get started today for as little as $49 a month on UserWay's monthly plan. Now, your company can be ADA compliant, reach more customers, and build loyalty. And remember, you get 30% off. That's right. And there are 1 billion people in the world with disabilities. That's roughly 13% of the population that you don't want to lose as potential customers because you're not compliant. Think about it. By not being compliant, fines and revenue loss will cost you so much more. UserWay is the leading accessibility solution in the market today with a market share of 61%, the biggest in the world. For years, UserWay has been on the cutting edge, creating innovative accessibility technologies that push the envelope of what's possible with AI, machine learning, and computer vision. And UserWay's AI automatically fixes violations at the code level. And here's some of the things they can actually do. It auto-generates image alts. It writes image descriptions for you. Remediates complex nav menus, ensures that all pop-ups are accessible. Plus, it fixes vague link violations and broken links. And UserWay gives you a detailed report of all the violations that were fixed on your website. UserWay is platform agnostic. It integrates seamlessly with WordPress, Shopify, Wix, Sitecore, SharePoint, and more. Let UserWay help your business meet its compliance goals and improve the experience for your users. The voice of Siri, Susan Bennett, has a message about UserWay.
Hi, I'm Susan Bennett, the original voice of Siri. You won't hear me say something like this too often. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're looking for. But every day, that's what the internet is like for millions of people with disabilities. UserWay fixes all of that with just one line of code.
UserWay can make any website fully accessible and ADA compliant. With UserWay, everyone who visits your site can browse seamlessly and customize it to fit their needs. It's also a perfect way to showcase your brand's commitment to millions of people with disabilities. Go to userway.org/twit and get 30% off UserWay's AI-powered accessibility solution. Book a short call and get their accessibility guide. UserWay, making the internet accessible for everyone. Visit userway.org/twit today. And we thank UserWay for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, we've been talking with Microsoft's Steve Kitay, Senior Director of Azure Space. We definitely want to talk more about Azure and what they're doing to unlock space and all of the data there. I do want to bring my co-host back in. Brian, I want to throw to you first.
Well, one of the things that, let's be honest, I actually got briefed on a system from AT&T almost 3 years ago. And the whole concept was I was sending data over cellular links, and it would have to go from Hawaii all the way to Austin, Texas, jump onto the internet, and come all the way back to Hawaii to hit my servers. That's a heck of a lot of latency. I was not alone. AT&T 3 years ago briefed me on putting virtual machines at the APNs that AT&T run, actually in the data center were the APNs, which, oh, by the way, APNs are virtual machines. And that cut half my latency out right there. But when I started reading about Azure Space, I started looking at that and going, I had a big flashback. So my question to Steve is, how close are the Azure virtual machines getting to the SpaceX ground stations?
So this is a great question, Brian. And you mentioned SpaceX. So, and I talked earlier about partnerships and how Microsoft is approaching this sector. So we are working with SpaceX and their Starlink constellation, which is over 2,000 satellites in low Earth orbit that are providing global broadband. Now, what we're working on doing with SpaceX is connecting anyone, anywhere to be seamlessly then away from Azure in the cloud and that compute that you talked about. And we're doing it not only with SpaceX and their Starlink constellation, which is very low latency, and these satellites are up on orbit providing capability today. We're also doing it with SES, which has a constellation called O3b in medium Earth orbit. And O3b is then extending to a new version of the constellation called O3b mPower, which will provide even more capacity. So what you can see that Microsoft is doing is working with multiple vendors at multiple orbits to provide cloud-enabled capability to our customers anywhere.
So when I was doing a lot of work with shooting data around on satellites, one of my biggest challenges were things like Active Directory authentication. If I had too much latency in there or too much jitter, my authentication would die horribly and I'd have to start again. I actually used a product from a good friend of mine, Carl Auerbach, who happens to actually be the inventor of IPTV. At Interworking Labs, I used this thing called KMax where I could actually go and dial in various types of latency, jitter, out of order packets, and so forth. And that way I could, even with something as weird, something like Hughes VSATs, I had real problem with that. It would be great if I didn't have to worry about latency as much. So here's the question. Azure Space obviously is dealing with a lot of different types of latencies. You mentioned 3 different satellite constellations, which I assume have some different types of latency and jitter issues. Are you folks able to help the customers deal with those types of things?
Absolutely. And that's where it depends on what the particular customer needs, because each orbit, each frequency band all have different advantages and potentially considerations associated with that. So a conversation, for instance, that we're having here, or if you're using a Teams application, latency is going to be extremely important. In other scenarios, you are going to prioritize, for instance, a very large pipe with high capacity to move data where maybe you would trade latency. And what we're doing is then working with customers on their particular needs to be able to give them this ecosystem of options. And then fundamentally, it does come back to marrying this data with the cloud, because it's the massive amounts of data that are being collected from space or moved through space that needs to be processed and needs to be understood. And where you see things going is really ubiquitous connectivity anywhere. And what we're working on doing is then tying that ubiquitous connectivity directly to the cloud.
Well, you're talking about tying connectivity to the cloud. One of the things that I'm really interested in, you know, we have now the cloud in space. A few years ago, we had some very well publicized instances of companies putting server containers in the ocean. When companies are looking at non-terrestrial locations for servers, is it proximity that they're considering? Are there environmental considerations? Are we just running out of room on land for servers? What are some of the considerations that are going into this?
So it's a great question, Curtis. And when I was speaking about the cloud in that scenario, it was the terrestrial cloud. This is the hyperscale cloud with over Azure, has over 60 regions of data centers across the globe, connected with 175,000 miles of fiber in a private network, then connected to this infrastructure in space. Now, the cloud extends to the edge. And the reason why you want the cloud extending to the edge is in certain circumstances, you want to do the processing right where the collection happens. And an example of what we're doing is we actually demonstrated processing on the edge with artificial intelligence in space on the International Space Station. And this was work that we did with NASA to do a test to help the astronauts understand if they had damage to their gloves after doing a spacewalk, because any sort of damage to their gloves can be a risk to their overall safety. So that's an example where they would want to know as soon as possible and leverage the benefit of artificial intelligence to be able to inform them if there is a problem.
You know, I like that idea of solving those problems. And it's interesting when you start talking about doing things on the space station. A couple of extra questions. You know, at some point, we're obviously going to start putting data in space. And one of the big issues around the world right now is data residency. You know, where is the data residing for certain sorts of privacy regulations? Is that something that the regulators and companies like Microsoft have thought about when it comes to space? You know, if it's in space, can no one serve you papers for data acquisition?
Well, Curt, it's a great point, and what I would say is absolutely fundamental to our approach and everything that we're building out is cybersecurity, and ensuring that that data residency that you were talking about, that customers know that their data is secure and protected, and that extends to whether it's on the spacecraft, through the ground station, or in the hyperscale cloud. And everything that we're working on doing is building upon the tremendous experience that we have as a company of ensuring cybersecurity of systems. So that's one area where we're really bringing unique knowledge to the industry. In fact, just one mention briefly there's an organization called the Space ISAC, which is an Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is all about sharing data between public and private organization on threats to space systems or the ground infrastructure. And Microsoft joined that as a founding member to really help bring our understanding and insights of those threat vectors to this community and how to address it.
Last question is, we've been mostly stuck in low Earth orbit for the past, we'll call it 40 years. Are you, or is anyone at Microsoft thinking about what happens when we start moving out of low Earth orbit? Are you thinking about what becomes possible if we get more than 120 miles off the surface?
So we absolutely are. And we are helping our customers address the problems that they have today, as well as looking towards the future. And if you look at NASA's mission and the Artemis launch, which many of us have been watching and rooting for them and excited for that launch to happen, which is focused on going back to the moon, and it's back to the moon to stay, and then to Mars. And as these missions progress further out, what will be important is to have the ability to compute in ways that, for instance, we demonstrated on the International Space Station, where you're building applications in the hyperscale cloud and then bringing them on board spacecraft, or in that case, space stations, where latency becomes more and more of a challenge as those missions are moving out further, is where some amount of onboard compute will be needed. But what you don't want to do is necessarily have to reinvent all this. We already know how to operate between the hyperscale cloud and out to the edge in a hybrid fashion, and now it's about bringing that to space.
You talked a little bit about, as a developer and engineer, I'm excited about this, but I want to get into it a little bit more. You talked a lot about the fact that there's a ton of data coming from space as well, and you want to essentially bring that down to developers, bring that closer to more applications. What's going on there? What is Azure doing there?
So we spoke a little bit about connectivity, and SpaceX, Starlink, and SES, and a number of others were building out systems that we are then connecting into the cloud. We spoke a little bit about space stations and doing applications on orbit. Now, the other area, and this huge change that's happening, is the observation of the Earth. And there's this new proliferation of satellites in a range of different phenomenologies, from electro-optical, so think of taking a picture from space of the Earth, to what's called synthetic aperture radar, which is a radar signal coming from space down to the Earth and back again, which can then see through clouds or in day-night, to RF collection, and a whole range of different systems, and more of these systems to allow more rapid revisit. So what we're working on doing is harnessing the data that is coming from these satellites. The first piece of that in that chain, when you think about a satellite orbiting the Earth, it needs to communicate to a ground station. It needs to get the commanding and controlling, and then send the data back down to the Earth to be processed. So Microsoft is building out a capability called Azure Orbital Ground Station. We're currently in a preview state where it enables spacecraft operators. If you decide I want to go build a spacecraft and operate in this certain way, you can then leverage this infrastructure of antennas to command and control your satellites and do it all from the cloud. and do it in a scalable way where you only pay for what you need and not the capital investments. And the way Microsoft is doing that is in a unique way, because there's other excellent leading companies like Viasat and KSAT that have a network of antennas already, that we're partnering directly with them to enable operators to access Microsoft antennas as well as our partner antennas from a single control plane. Now that data, once you come in and control that data and then bring it into the cloud, then needs to be processed. It needs to be analyzed and then brought out to enterprise customers to drive those insights. And this is one of really the unique things about Microsoft, is that when we look at connectivity, Earth observation, for us, it's not necessarily about space per se. It's how do we leverage space to enable these enterprise customers, in addition to the variety of other means. And when we're talking about connectivity, it may be 5G terrestrial space. In Earth observation, it may be IoT sensors, it may be drones, it may be satellites. And how do you bring that data together for them, and then bring artificial intelligence and machine learning? And I can talk a bit more about that, if helpful, for these customers to then gain unique and timely insights.
What would actually be really interesting and helpful is you talked a lot about the usage of this data. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the use cases there, what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and there's a range of use cases, whether from public sector. For instance, we worked with NOAA, which operates weather satellites globally, to then inform the US and others around the world. And we worked with them on our Azure Orbital Ground Station to show them how this network could be used and this infrastructure could be used to command and control their government satellites, and then bring data into the cloud. So in the future, it saves them money, and they don't have to build and operate and maintain their own. They can leverage this or leverage it to provide more resiliency. Now, there's other really interesting use cases, for instance, than what you're doing with that data. And there's a couple to point to here. In particular, if you think about sustainability and the changing impacts of the Earth. And one area we helped is actually working with Australia and CSIRO, which is their science and research organization, to understand the impacts of feral cows and herd on indigenous people's land and property, and the damage that these herds can do to this land, and using space to actually monitor and predict what these cows are doing to be able to control and then make the right decisions to help the indigenous people in this area. Now, there's also areas closer to home when talking about sustainability. For instance, I don't know if you're familiar with Lake Mead, which is in Nevada. And if you go online and look at Lake Mead, one thing that is unfortunately happening due to some of the changing effects of the globe is the water is going down tremendously. And what we did from space is we took the data of Lake Mead over time, and we worked with one of our partners, Black Shark AI, which was able to bring artificial intelligence to then create polygons and measure out what is happening to this lake in the past. And it took a whole series of data and then make projections out into the future. So it can really inform decision making on decisions we make in critical areas such as the changing nature of the Earth.
It's amazing. Well, unfortunately, we're running low on time. I warned you before the show. The show goes very fast because you talk about a lot of interesting stuff. Thank you so much for being here, Steve. Since we're running low on time, though, I do want to give you a chance to maybe tell the folks at home where they can learn more about Azure Space, maybe how they can get started, how they can bring it to their organization and start using it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lou. Encourage you to go to the Microsoft website, look up Azure Space, and you will find information there on our products and how to get started. I encourage you to reach out. It goes to, I hope what you take away from this discussion is this tremendous change that's happening with space. And what's happening now is Microsoft is working with these space companies to take these capabilities of this tremendous change and help you harness it and bring it into your enterprise solutions. So we're excited about this. We're just getting started. Really, I think on a very exciting journey. We'll be at World Satellite Business Week next week in Paris, and you can expect more to come there.
Well, folks, you've done it again. You've sat to another hour of the best dang enterprise and IT podcast in the universe. You've heard it here, folks. Bring in commoditizing space. That's right. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to our co-hosts, starting with our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, what's going on for you in the coming weeks, and where can people find you?
Well, you can find me, as always, working hard on analysis and various forms of deep thought at omdia.com. Also be putting articles on darkreading.com/omdia. And I'm trying to, now that I'm healthier, get a little bit more out on LinkedIn. And you can find out about all of these things by following my account on Twitter. That's at KG4GWA. Always love to hear from members of the TWiT Riot.
Thank you, Curtis. Well, we also have to thank our very own Mr. Brian Chee. Cheeber, what's going on for you in the coming weeks? Where can people find you?
Well, I throw all kinds of weird and wacky stuff on Twitter, and that's I'm ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. People have been throwing all kinds of ideas at me. I've actually been talking about doing field kits, a steamer trunk that opens up so you can have a desk and, various tools and so forth. But this whole conversation was kind of cool. It brought up memories of right before I left the University of Hawaii. I actually had a really unusual conversation. It was the first time mechanical engineers started bugging me about oddball and different communications systems out there. And I started introducing them to the research satellites that the National Science Foundation has put up, because the mechanical engineers were getting frustrated with not being able to get sensors out for crumbling bridges around the United States. So that was kind of interesting. They are really, really looking forward to SpaceX and different types of communications so that they can have sensors on bridges way out in the boonies. Anyway, you're also more than welcome to toss show ideas at me via email. I'm Cheebert, spelled CheeBert at twit.tv. But if you'd like, you can also send email to TWiT at twit.tv, and that'll hit all the hosts. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear your questions. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Cheebert. Well, we also have to thank you as well. You're the person who drops in each and every week to watch and to listen to our show to get your enterprise goodness. We want to make it easy for you to watch and listen and catch up on your enterprise and IT news. So go to our show page right now, twit.tv/enterprise. There you'll find all the amazing back episodes, the show notes, co-host information, and of course the guest information and the links of the stories that we do during the show. But more importantly, there you'll see next to those videos, you'll get those helpful subscribe and download links. Support the show by getting your audio version or your video version of your choice. Listen on any one of your podcast applications, because we're on all of them. So definitely subscribe and support the show. Plus, you may have also heard we also have Club TWiT. That's right. It's a members-only ad-free podcast service with a bonus TWiT Plus feed that you can't get anywhere else. And it's only $7 a month. That's right. There are a lot of great things about Club TWiT. One of them is really the exclusive access to a members-only Discord server where you can chat with hosts, producers. You can have separate discussion channels. Lots of great ones out there. Plus special events. That's right. They have a lot of great events to check out there as well. So definitely check out Club TWiT. Join Club TWiT. Be part of the movement. Go to twit.tv/ twit. Of course, you got to also remember that Club Twit now offers corporate plans as well, corporate group plans. It's a great way to give your team access to the ad-free tech podcast that we do. The plans start at 5 members at a discounted rate of $6 each per month, and you can add as many seats as you like there. And this is really a great way for your IT department, your developers, your tech teams, your sales teams to really stay up to date with access to all of our podcasts. And just like regular memberships, if they join, they also get TWiT Discord server access as well as the TWiT Plus bonus feed. So definitely check out Club TWiT at twit.tv/clubtwit. Now, after you subscribe, impress your family members, your coworkers, your friends with the gift of TWiT, because we talk a lot about fun tech topics on this show, especially today's show. I can guarantee they will find it interesting as well. So definitely share it with them and have them subscribe. But if you have already subscribed, we do this show live at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time on Fridays. That's right. We're doing it live right now. Come see how the pizza's made. Come all the behind the scenes. That's right. Go to check out live at twit.tv. That's the website. All the streams are on there. So you can check it out. All different types of streams, different latencies. Definitely come see the banter. Come see all the fun. Plus, if you're going to watch the show live, you might as well jump into our IRC channel as well. Our infamous IRC channel at irc.twit.tv. We have a lot of great characters in there, and we have a lot of awesome discussions, questions that come. We veer the show in different directions from there. So definitely be part of the chat room at irc.twit.tv. Definitely hit me up at twitter.com/LouMM. There I post all my enterprise tidbits, direct message me about show ideas. We have lots of great discussions. Of course, you want to know what I do during my normal work week, definitely check out developers.microsoft.com/office. There we post all the latest and greatest ways you can make Office more productive for your organization, how you can extend Office and make it really a lot more useful. I want to make sure I thank everyone who makes this show possible. Especially thank you to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every week, and we couldn't do this show without their support. So thank you, Leo and Lisa, for all your support. I also want to thank all the staff at TWiT. They continue to support us each and every week. I also want to thank Mr. Brian Chee one more time. He's not only our co-host, but he's also our tireless producer. Chee, thank you for all your support, for helping us book and plan for the shows. It really makes it easy for us each and every week. And before we sign out, I want to thank our editor, Anthony. He's always making us look good after the fact. And of course, our TD, our technical director for today, the talented Mr. Ant Pruitt. He does an amazing show called Hands-On Photography each and every week. I learn something each and every week from him. Ant, what's going on Hands-On Photography for this week?
Hey there, Mr. Lou. Well, this week I had the honor and pleasure of speaking with actually it's a friend of mine from back in the Carolinas who is a professional photographer that takes photographs of the bestest team in all the land, Clemson Tigers. But we talk about some fine art in NILs. Pretty controversial topic today. So check it out, twit.tv/hop.
Thank you, sir. And until next time, I'm Louis from Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.
Hey, we should talk Linux. It's the operating system that runs the internet, but your game consoles, cell phones, and maybe even the machine on your desk. But you already knew all that. What you may not know is that TWiT now has a show dedicated to it, the Untitled Linux Show. Whether you're a Linux pro, a burgeoning sysadmin, or just curious what the big deal is, you should join us on the Club TWiT Discord every Saturday afternoon for news, analysis, and tips to sharpen your Linux skills. And then make sure you subscribe to the Club TWiT exclusive Untitled Linux Show. Wait, you're not a Club TWiT member yet? Well, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and sign up. Hope to see you there.